At this juncture, the session for question and answer will commence. As I mentioned earlier, there will be 4 questions entertained, 2 from the Nigerian Press Corps and 2 from the United States Press Corps. They will be handled from one press corps each to the next. And I will begin by calling on Adesua Omoruwan of Arise News, Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Foreign Minister, Secretary Blinken, can I just say that you missed watching the better football game at AFCON yesterday, where our Super Eagles emerged victorious, and not the game you saw in Abidjan, where Ivory Coast was, suffered a crushing and crashing out defeat. But to my question, I just thought I should put that out, Mr. Secretary. Secretary, the U.S. has demonstrated its willingness to support the likes of Ukraine and other in-battle democracies when threatened by anti-democratic powers. In line with this, Nigerians have asked the question why similar levels of support in terms of hard equipment, financing, and intelligence are not provided at a similar scale with a similar level of urgency, given the fact that there is a clear attempt by some powers to create a belt of dictatorships at the expense of democracy in the Sahel. And permit me, Mr. Secretary, why is the US and its allies not showing the same level of concern, considering the level of insecurity and infrastructural devastation present in some regions in Nigeria? You have just said some of your workers were affected in the recent killings, and you have reassured President Bola Tinubu. But Nigerians will wonder why it seems as if the US and its allies are less concerned about the sustenance and development of democracies in Africa compared to the democracies in Europe, like we see you do. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Let me start by saying that we were very impressed with the Super Eagles. And of course, as a good diplomat, I'm not going to pick sides, but we wish very well for the Super Eagles as they move forward in the tournament. Let me say this in response to the, I think, very important question. I have to tell you, we are intensely focused on challenges to security in the region, in the Sahel, intensely focused because of the impact that it's having on our friends and partners, intensely focused because of the broader impact that insecurity can have on all of us, including the United States. And we've already talked a little bit about Niger, where the leadership that President Tinubu is showing through ECOWAS, we hope can make a difference in restoring the constitutional order and restoring a critical partner in trying to find security in the region. One thing I can also say is this. As some countries have looked to various ways of providing security, including going to partners like the Wagner Group, what we've seen is actually the problem getting manifestly worse and worse and worse. You see the exploitation of people and resources by Wagner. We've actually seen violence and extremism in the countries where it's been operating go up, not down. In fact, go up dramatically. Having said that, it's important that we be working to support our partners who are trying to find effective ways of fighting insecurity. And we are working to support Nigeria. We're working to support our Lake Chad region partners to strengthen the capacity of their security forces in a whole variety of ways to deal with insecurity. And yes, that does go to equipment, to technology, to weapons, and we're working on that, but it also goes to many other things, including information sharing, intelligence, technical support, advice, and it goes to having a comprehensive approach that genuinely focuses on citizen security, working with local communities in partnership demonstrating that security forces are there first and foremost to protect them and to support their needs. By the way, that was an approach that was delivering results in Niger when President Bazoum was in office before he was deposed in a coup. And in every place where there's been an unconstitutional change in leadership, as I said, things have only gotten worse. So when you look at what we are doing, we're providing assistance through a variety of means, through our diplomacy, engaging with other countries, through our security assistance, through police and military and justice program reforms, which are vital, through dialogue efforts, through development programs. All of these things work hand in hand. Now, it's also vitally important from our perspective and the perspective of our Congress that there be a focus on making sure that civilians are protected, that humanitarian considerations be taken into consideration and into concern as all of these efforts are underway. And that's part of our dialogue and conversation too with our partners in Nigeria and elsewhere in the region.
Hands up from the United States Press Corps, those who would like to ask a question. Please introduce yourself.
Julien Piquet from Jeune Afrique and the Africa Report. I have a follow-up question to my Nigerian colleague's question. You're meeting today as the Sahel is increasingly fragmented, as you know. I was wondering if you think West African leaders and their Western allies should engage with coup leaders. You know, Presidents Biden and President Tinubu are both reluctant to accept the coup in Niger, understandably. But does that risk, you know, pushing the junta into the hands of the Russians, just like Mali and Burkina Faso? Thank you.
Look, I don't think these two things are inconsistent. We, of course, don't recognize what happened in Niger or in other countries where a coup's taken place. And in fact, we clearly declared the fact that there had been a coup. The question is, what is the most effective way to get back on the democratic track, in the case of Niger, to return to the constitutional order? And that also involves some engagement with those who perpetrated the coup, which is exactly what ECOWAS has done, what President Tinubu has done, what we've done in engaging with the CNSP and setting out what is necessary if Niger is to once again enjoy the relationships that it had with all of us, including assistance, including cooperation on counterterrorism, including other forms of support. So I don't think these things are inconsistent. And as I mentioned, back in December, there was a very important meeting between ECOWAS, chaired by President Tinubu, and those responsible for the coup in Niger, to just be very clear about what we're looking for, what the region is looking for, what ECOWAS is looking for, what the international community is looking for, to get Niger back on track. Now, we'll see if that produces results, but I think being very clear about what happened, very clear about what we're doing about it, but also having the appropriate engagement is necessary to see if we can move this to a better place.
The second question from the Nigerian Press Corps. Please raise your hand. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Angulu. I write for the Punch newspapers. Secretary Blinken, the policies of President Bola Tinubu seem to align closely with many prescriptions and recommendations of the World Bank and Western allies. They include policies such as the removal of long-standing subsidies on petrol, and of course the unification of the foreign exchange rates, amongst others. Nigerians anticipated a reciprocal boost in infrastructural investment and US dollar liquidity injection, the kind seen in Egypt, Ethiopia, Israel, and others. But that has not been forthcoming. President Joe Biden launched the Build Back Better World program for infrastructural investment in developing countries. Now, what can you tell Nigerians about the extent of investment across sectors that the United States is ready and willing to commit to the Nigerian economy? And what encumbrances, if any, do you see in the way of tens of billions of dollars worth of investment in infrastructure and the US dollar denominated liquidity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, as I mentioned before, and I think a few things are important here. One is what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is very real interest on the part of American companies, American investors in working here in Nigeria, investing here in Nigeria, helping partner with Nigeria, and in so doing, create new jobs, new opportunities, and even new industries. This is a big focus of our binational commission and the work that we're doing together. I mentioned as well, though, there remain some impediments that we hear from our own business community that I think stand in the way of maximizing those opportunities. One is the repatriation of capital. This is important. I know the central bank governor is working on that. And second is the ongoing effort to combat corruption, because companies that come in and invest want to make sure that they're going to be investing with a fair and level playing field. And corruption, of course, is a big impediment to that. Having said all of that, look, I do think we're seeing real movement. When we had the Africa Leaders Summit hosted by President Biden, one of the commitments we made was to generate an additional $55 billion in private sector investment in Africa over the next 3 years. Well, here we are 1 year after the summit, and we are 40% of the way to achieving that goal. By 2 years out after the summit, based on the trajectory we're on now, we'll be at 70% of that goal, and we will achieve the goal in the 3 years as President Biden set out. That's just one, albeit an important manifestation, not only of our commitment to generating more private sector investment, but actually to doing it. And as President Tinubu and I had a chance to discuss this, I think there are responsibilities on all sides. One, as I mentioned, are the things that can be done here in Nigeria to create the best possible climate for investment. But two, on our end, is to use all of the tools of government that we can to support that, because for the United States, as much as we are doing with assistance programs of one kind or another, as much as we are doing as being the leading contributor by far to virtually every United Nations program that helps other countries, and that may not be so known to people because it may have a United Nations label on it as opposed to a USA label on it. There is more that we can, and President Biden is doing, to help us generate private sector investment, which is really the comparative advantage that we bring. And that includes using some of the tools in our government that have not been used as effectively before to support the private sector in terms of risk investment, in terms of supporting in one way or another the investments with insurance, with participation. We have tools like the Development Finance Corporation, like the Export-Import Bank and others that are now working together in ways that they haven't before and firing on all cylinders. It's a whole of government approach to trying to generate and target private sector investment. One last thing. I'm convinced more than ever before that in Africa in general, in Nigeria in particular, because of its extraordinary strengths, so much more can and should be made in Africa for Africans, but also for the entire world. I think there are tremendous opportunities here, for example, in the pharmaceutical sector to make things here in Nigeria. But that also requires doing things like strengthening the regulatory agencies that are responsible for overseeing something as complicated and as challenging as pharmaceuticals. And also, so that Nigeria can be an exporter to other countries in the region, harmonizing regulations and rules with other countries in the region. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, but the foundation is there, the intent is there, the energy is there, as we both do what's necessary to create the strongest possible environment for investment here, to maximize the tools that we have at our disposal to support private sector investment. I think you'll see that moving forward in very significant ways.
Permit me, Your Excellencies, to remind the participants present here that following the next question and answer, this session will come to a close. And the reason why I mention this now is because it is important that everyone remain seated while the United States Secretary of State and the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs depart from this hall. Without further ado, I invite the next question from the U.S. Press Corps.
Thank you. Good evening. Michael Crowley with the New York Times. Secretary Blinken, you have said that among the principles the U.S. believes in for the aftermath of the conflict in Gaza, one of them is that Israel must not create buffer zones or change the size of Palestinian territory within Gaza. There's some reporting and indications that Israel may in fact be beginning to do that now. I wondered, first, do you believe that to be the case? Are you seeing those indications that Israel may be trying to create buffer areas? And if that is the case, what might the Biden administration be trying to do to prevent that? Mr. Minister, my question for you also relates to the conflict in Gaza. Nigeria has supported a ceasefire in Gaza at the United Nations. The United States does not support a ceasefire in Gaza, and I wonder whether that difference in position and the U.S. position toward the conflict in Gaza might be causing any harm to America's image within your country, where there have been demonstrations in support of the Palestinians and calls for a ceasefire. Thank you both.
Michael, I'm happy to start. So, as you said, we've been very clear going back some months now about some basic principles when it comes to the way forward for Gaza and more broadly. And with regard to Gaza, we've been very clear our opposition to the forced displacement of people. We've been very clear about maintaining, in effect, the territorial integrity of Gaza, which is what you've alluded to, and a number of other critical principles, including Palestinian governance of Gaza, reunified with the West Bank, etc. Whether there need to be, and it's appropriate to have transitional arrangements as Israel reduces the intensity of its military operations in Gaza and ultimately brings them to a conclusion in order to both ensure its security, to make sure that October 7th can never happen again, and then get to a place where we have more permanent arrangements that go to the governance of Gaza, the security of Gaza, the redevelopment of Gaza. I think that's one question, but we've been very clear about opposing any permanent change to Gaza's territory configuration. Now, one thing that's also very important, you've had in Israel hundreds of thousands of people in the south and in the north taken together who've been forced because of insecurity to flee their homes. Of course, people in southern Israel adjacent to Gaza after October 7th, as well as people in northern Israel because of insecurity coming from the border with Lebanon. And it is totally appropriate and something we support that those people be able to return to their homes and that the necessary security arrangements be in place to give them the confidence to do that. So, again, if there need to be transitional arrangements to enable that to happen, that's one thing. But when it comes to the permanent status of Gaza going forward, we've been clear, we remain clear about not encroaching on its territory.
Thank you. The issue of Gaza is one that President Tinubu brought up during the course of the discussions, and it was deliberated upon. It was discussed extensively. The approach here is to focus on the commonalities. So one thing we have in common, a common denominator between the US and Nigeria, is the fact that we both agree that the way forward is the two-state solution. And I think that's not in doubt. Having said that, of course, each country behaves with regards to foreign policy with the influence of its domestic politics and domestic influences. So it's not surprising that Nigeria, of course, has been from the get-go very expressive with regards to the issue of proportionality of violence. The Israeli approach, in Gaza, we've expressed concerns, which is why I was part of a 7-member committee of foreign ministers that went round to world capitals, calling for a cessation of fire. So that remains, but we focus on the commonalities, not on the differences. Thank you.
This session has come to a close. Please remain seated. Please